In this program, we report on a sensitive, endlessly discussed, often hotly debated issue, performance appraisal. When we have our academic caps on, we often claim, very piously, that performance appraisal is absolutely necessary if an organization is to thrive and grow. But the moment it's applied to ourselves, we cry foul. It's subjective, unfair, partisan, and so on. The problem becomes compounded when the organization is large, needs people of varying disciplines and talents, and is spread over many locations. Then, even designing, let alone implementing a uniform appraisal system becomes a hair-raising task. Then there's another side to the issue, performance appraisal in the public sector. Given the size, geographic spread, and aspect of job security in public sector organizations, effective performance appraisal seems a rather remote possibility. Well, today we're going to blast a few myths. We're going to show you a massive public sector organization where a performance appraisal system has been in operation for some years now, and promotions are now linked to performance. We're talking of the Steel Authority of India Limited, or SAIL. Here's a broad profile of the organization from our reporter at one of its plants at Bhilai.
SAIL produces about 9 million tons of crude steel every year at 7 plants spread all over the country. It is, in fact, the largest manufacturing organization in India. To give you an example of its size, here's an interesting fact. The annual budget of SAIL is higher than that of any state, barring UP and Maharashtra. The steel it produces goes into making an immense variety of products, from a teaspoon to a Vijayanta tank, from a sewing needle to an oil rig. SAIL utilizes the skills of engineers of every discipline, plus professionals in marketing, R&D, finance, materials handling, personnel, medicine, education, and more. It directly employs over 235,000 people, including 18,000 managers. And in recent years, it has pulled off what can only be termed a financial miracle. In the early 80s, SAIL was burdened with cumulative losses totaling 276 crores of rupees. Over the next few years, the losses were progressively reduced. And in 1988-89, SAIL recorded a profit of 358 crores of rupees and wiped off all its cumulative losses. Fortune magazine of the USA termed it as one of the fastest turnarounds that year. This is Karun Prabhakar reporting from Bhilai.
From a cumulative loss situation in 1985-86 to a profit of 358 crore rupees in 88-89. An amazing achievement. To tell us more about it is the chairman of SAIL. Tell us, Mr. Krishnamurthy, to what do you attribute this incredible turnaround?
Let me first thank you for having noticed this remarkable change. I will attribute this change in the Steel Authority of India to the people behind this organization. First, we began to look at ourselves differently. We actively promoted an organizational culture where performance is recognized and rewarded. What we are doing essentially is replacing mediocrity with people of proven merit. We are saying that if you perform, the organization is committed to invest in your growth. We have also encouraged healthy competition amongst our people. It has a distinct shift in policy to which our people responded splendidly.
And would you say that the introduction of a performance appraisal system was a major contributing factor?
Well, there has been very many factors, but I agree with you that the introduction of this new appraisal system was one of our most potent instruments of change. It not only helped to bring about the change, but also it symbolized the transformation that has taken place in the organization.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We'll be back with you later in the program. At this juncture, I'd like to introduce you to the Director of Personnel at SAIL, Mr. M R R Nair, under whose guidance the new appraisal system has been evolved and implemented. Now, Mr. Nair, I'd like to know what were the basic objectives behind reviewing and revising the old system and implementing the new one.
Let's begin by examining the old system. In the old system, the ratings were impressionistic and not based on those performance factors which organizations wanted, derived from the business goals and business strategies. Besides, the output of the system was hardly ever used for any decision making on rewards or punishment, so the system was not taken seriously by most people. Managers would get automatically promoted once their turn came based on seniority. This robbed our managers of their initiative and enterprise and led to a mixture of complacence and cynicism.
So how did you manage to remove or at least reduce this lethargy?
By linking performance with promotions and all other rewards like selection for special assignments, training abroad, job rotations, replacing seniority with merit. Now, to be able to do so, we needed a reliable mechanism that could measure performance more objectively.
But didn't you already have an appraisal system in place?
We did, but it was neither adequate for the felt organizational needs nor very reliable. Also, the executives had very little faith in the system.
And why was that?
First, there was no basic criteria against which the appraisal was done. The appraiser simply had a 5-point scale, A, B, C plus, C and C minus, and he just ticked off one of those. Second was the system of reporting. An appraisee would first be assessed by his immediate superior, who had day-to-day contact with him. The rating would then go to an officer one grade higher, who could change the rating. Finally, it went to the higher authority, who could overrule the previous ratings. And this final rating would stand, made by an officer with whom the appraisee had the least contact and who had the least day-to-day knowledge of the appraisee's work. The immediate superior had very little say in the final rating.
So the appraisee knew who he had to keep happy, right? Well, and how was this rating used?
It was filed away because, except for a handful of managers who were rated non-promotable, everybody got promoted as per their seniority.
So all one had to do was acquire a few gray hair and wrinkles. Well, that's interesting. Right, so you needed to revamp the system. What did you have in mind when you began?
We had a host of objectives for the present appraisal system. The major ones were: 1, to integrate the individual contribution with the organizational objectives by laying down goals and targets against which the assessment was to be made. 2, to provide a set of criteria for assessment, to reduce subjectivity and bias, and also to appraise people against the parameters which are decided by the company. 3, to ensure that the rating given by the appraisee's immediate superior had a weightage which could not be nullified by anyone. 4, to distinguish levels of performance. 5, we also took into account the large number of retirements taking place at top managerial levels. So we needed to identify high achievers who could fill the slots and do it quickly. Succession planning is vital for any organization. And 6, we wanted to develop an appraisal system that would become a developmental tool, something that would help the organization to identify the people who could be future leaders, and also to identify training and development needs of each individual appraisee. In sum, the system aimed at meeting 4 criteria. A, relevance, the link between the performance standards and organizational goal. B, sensitivity, the system being capable of distinguishing between effective and ineffective performance. C, acceptability, front-end support and participation, so the system was evolved within the company. And D, practicability, easy to understand and easy to use.
In essence, a system that would bring about both individual and organizational growth. Now, that's a tall order. Tell me, weren't you alarmed at the magnitude of what you had taken on?
Yes, it was a challenging task, but we knew we needed to do it. We also knew that bringing in a host of new concepts and practices would throw up a variety of problems. We went ahead with total awareness of these problems. Basically, we had the faith in ourselves, in our people. We still do. So we just went ahead.
He makes it sound so simple, but how did they really go about creating this new system? To tell us more about it, we have three members of Sales Human Resource Development Department, Ipsita Kathuria, V K Verma, and Deepak Dhawan. All three of them were intimately associated with the evolution and implementation of the present appraisal system. So how did they begin? Let's begin with you, Ipsita.
Our first strategy was to collect feedback. We went and asked our managers what they thought about the old system and what they expected from a new one.
You couldn't have picked up a phone and spoken to 18,000 managers.
Oh, not really. A few of us went to the plants, we held workshops there, we collected feedback also through structured questionnaires. We met a large representative sample of our managers.
And then, we followed it up with the analysis of the questionnaire responses and the workshop sessions, which basically gave us the guidelines to go from.
Well, in the next step, we collected existing appraisal systems from a large number of organizations. We studied them in great detail and went through piles of books on the subject. Basically, we were trying to learn from other people's experiences.
That's how we prepared our first draft. We discussed it, we debated it, we went through it many times till we were satisfied with it. And then we sent it out to our plants for the reaction of our managers.
You see, we made sure that it was a truly interactive process, because eventually it was the managers who had to use or misuse the system. So it was essential that they were part of the evolutionary process.
Even when the system was finalized and presented in all the plants, we got some adverse reactions. We went on fine-tuning the system, changing and chopping, but we did not compromise with the basic philosophy behind the system. And we kept in contact with our managers throughout this process.
So you finally had a complete appraisal system in place. Now, can we go into the various components of this system?
Yes, the first step is the fixing of goals or the setting of targets.
I fix tasks and targets for each of my executives for the year, and we do this exercise jointly. Now each target is clearly specified and put down. This not only gives me a solid base on which to evaluate the performance of my subordinates, it in fact motivates them to perform much better. In fact, it helps the whole department to plan and perform better. Now the tasks and targets of each manager are derived from the departmental goals, which are in turn taken from the objectives of the organization. Now, some targets are not quantifiable. In such cases, tasks are clearly defined and time spans are also clearly specified.
The second step is self-appraisal. We have evolved a specially designed self-appraisal form which every appraisee has to fill in.
My task and targets for the whole period is set down right here in this appraisal form. After 6 months, I fill in the task I have fulfilled, the constraints I have faced, and my suggestions for improvement. At the end of year, I put down what I feel are my developmental needs and also what are the highlights of my performance. This self-appraisal gives me an opportunity to put down what I have done throughout the period or what I have achieved during the period. It is an important input for not only my assessment by my boss, but also for some important managerial decisions to do improvement in my performance and my development.
The next step is the performance review discussion, or the PRD.
Twice in a year I call in each of my subordinates for an uninterrupted heart-to-heart interaction. I talk of departmental functions and their own performance, what they have achieved and where they could have done much better. I keep a complete performance record of each individual while discussing so that I don't get biased by recent events. I use this opportunity for feedback on myself also, how I can help them to improve their performance and their advancement. I discuss their training and development needs. This session is also used for performance planning for future and to review the tasks or targets. In my so many years experience and personal opinion, a good performance review discussion establishes mutuality between me and my subordinates and does really wonders for their morale.
The next step is the actual assessment on the performance appraisal form.
This form has 14 criteria for junior manager to manager level, against which I evaluate each of my boys. Of course, for senior levels, it has 13 factors. There is a 6-point scale, and the meaning of each point for each of the factors is given right here in the annexure. It is of great help. Now you see, a man can be a great problem solver but lacks in communication skills. Another may be a great planner but is poor in managing his subordinates. So this form helps me to become objective. It pins me down and it stops me from making any unfair generalizations. Also, this system recognizes that contributions at different levels is different. Accordingly, for junior management, it has given a weightage of 67% for actual performance, and for managerial ability 33%. For senior levels, the weightage given is 50-50.
The next step is to identify each appraisee's training and developmental needs.
Well, I realize it is my responsibility to develop my subordinates in keeping with their strength and weakness. So I discuss with them their needs to grow and put them on this page. It could mean training, job rotation, job enrichment, and so on. The training needs are put down separately in this form. This sheet of paper is detached and sent to the training department.
Thank you all very much for telling us how it all happened. So we now know that there are 5 steps in the appraisal process. 1. Setting tasks and targets. 2. Self-appraisal. 3. Performance review discussion. 4. Assessment. And 5. Identifying developmental and training needs. Now, what about the reporting levels? Suppose a boss really hates his junior's guts. He might give a poor rating despite a good performance. Or look at the other extreme, an undeserved high rating. That can also happen. Now, does the system look after this? To tell us about this, we have Mr. Brijlal Kshatriya, who is the General Manager of Personnel and Administration at the Bhilai Steel Plant.
Look, any system which is run by human beings is bound to have certain biases. Now, we have to have certain checks to reduce the subjectivity to the minimum. In our system, we have 3-tier way where the reporting officer, reviewing officer, and performance review committee, that we call PRC, come into picture.
Well, how exactly does this work?
The reporting officer, who is the immediate boss of the appraisee, does the initial rating on a scale of 30 to 180. Then comes the reviewing officer, who is the boss of the reporting officer, does the rating again on the same scale, that is 30 to 180. Now, the reviewing officer has to know the appraisee well so that he can remove the biases which have been there in the reporting officer's rating. Now, we have one more system. The weightage which is given to the reporting and reviewing officer is 50%. That means the 50% of the marks given by the reporting officer are taken into account, and 50% of the points given by the reviewing officer are taken into account. Then comes the role of Performance Review Committee. The Performance Review consists of the heads of the department, and this committee is headed by a very senior officer, could be of the rank of Deputy General Manager or an Additional General Manager.
You have to see the other candidates also.
The Performance Review Committee is given the primary gradings and the final scores of all the appraisees. Then they have to decide on the final gradings, which are A star, A, B, C and C star. Now, this final grading is done after the reviewing officer's rating is done. All these the primary gradings are put on the normal distribution curve,
In this, the top 25% come into A, middle 50% come into B, and the last 25% come into C. The performance review committee has to identify A stars, that is the top performers among the A's, and the C stars, that is the poorest performers among the C's. Now they are also responsible for moderation and the job rotation. The selection of A stars and C stars are not mandatory, but PRC can select up to 5% of A stars among the A's and 5% of C stars among the C's. Now the selection is based on variety of criteria. The number one is the performance of the department or unit where the officer is working, interdepartmental disparity in the assessment. Third is the assessment of the PRC, and the fourth one is the assessment of reporting and reviewing officer. Now the point to be kept in mind is that all the A's and all the C's are entitled to be rated as A star and C star. Now coming to the point of moderation, the PRC is empowered to shift an appraisee only by one step higher or one step lower, depending upon the interdepartment disparities of overrating and underrating. But one thing has to be kept in mind, that moderation has to be the minimum and it has to keep the overall normal distribution intact.
So, the greatest weightage to arrive at the final score is given to the ratings of the reporting and the reviewing officers. The PRC does a limited amount of moderation and identifies the most outstanding and the poorest performers. Is that right?
Right. But PRC has got one more role to play, that is counseling the C stars. The PRC meets each C star individually to find out the reasons for their poor performances and suggest ways and means of improving their performances, and sometimes a mere transfer or a job rotation can bring wonders in his performances. Now beyond this, every C star has got a provision to appeal against the C star to the chief of PRC or to chief executive, whose decision is binding.
So there you have it, the reporting officer, the reviewing officer and the performance review committee. Actually, it's a pretty involved system, and getting 18,000 managers to accept it, understand it and put it into practice must have been quite a task. We're talking here of implementation. How did they do it? To help us understand it, we have with us Professor T.V. Rao and Professor Arun Monappa, both members of the faculty at the Indian Institute of Management at Ahmedabad. They assisted SAIL as consultants in implementing the new performance appraisal system. Now, Professor Rao, how exactly did you go about implementing this system?
Well, first we studied the system designed by SAIL. It's only after we were convinced about the efficacy of the system and its appropriateness for SAIL, we started the implementation process. In the implementation process, we conducted training programs at various plants in which we explained the system, clarified doubts, and helped people to understand how this system is going to help them in many ways.
So you couldn't have trained all of 18,000 managers?
Obviously not. So a group of managers were chosen from each plant who acted as our internal resource persons. They were chosen on the basis of their past performance, their communication ability and generally their credibility. They were given extensive training on the whys, whens and hows of the new appraisal system, and they in turn went back to each plant and trained the several managers. In other words, they became internal consultants in the organization, and they were also accessible to all the managers at any point of time to take care of any problems that may arise.
As a matter of fact, we managed to speak to one of SAIL's internal resource persons. We have him right here on the monitor.
My job as internal resource person is to inform, explain, answer and persuade. One major thrust was to make managers appreciate that time which they spend on the new system actually goes to develop their juniors, which enhances their own productivity and that of the company.
Okay. Now, what were the kind of problems you faced?
Well, in introducing systems of this kind, any organization faces normally two types of problems, and the same happened in implementing this system in SAIL. The first are the problems of comprehension and the second are the attitudinal problems. In the first category, I would put the difficulty that managers had in explaining to the juniors how to set targets and setting targets for the juniors. The second major difficulty arose in relation to the performance review discussions, because performance review discussion involves a very complex process and requires interpersonal skills of giving and receiving feedback. In addition, we had to explain to the managers also how to fill in the form and how the various components are going to be used and so on. Of course, many felt that the system is very complicated, and for that our answer was that managers of sale who deal with much more sophisticated things like designing machines, control systems, computers and so on should not be very difficult, and normally once you start implementing you will find the things are not as complicated as they appear at the time of introducing the system.
And what about attitudinal problems?
Well, initially any new system is resisted. We heard them out, we heard the grievances and the problems they had. Then we gave them the concepts behind the new system, the whole planning of the new system. We told them the practices in other organizations and what results had been achieved as a result of the appraisal system. Then they got the conviction, or at least some clarity in their minds, and went back to their organizations. Subsequently, when the performance review committee was introduced, there was some apprehension. They thought the whole system would go topsy-turvy. We had to conduct mock exercises and simulated exercises on these situations, which then helped to clarify in their own minds what this whole program is about.
In addition, there was a basic resistance to the idea that promotions are going to be based on merit rather than seniority. Winds of change are already existing in SAIL with the priority of action project going on, and in addition we had to tell the managers that their career path is in their hands and they can determine their future as a result of this particular system.
So you held workshops and put in resource persons at every plant. What else?
Well, there is a continuous monitoring of the entire program. The HRD department does a lot of research, it conducts interviews, it conducts surveys, and problem areas are identified, solutions are offered. Besides, there are periodic training workshops, there is a very high-powered interplant steering committee to oversee this program. And in other words, there is a continuous evolution of the whole process. It is not fixed at any point in time.
Thank you, gentlemen, for telling us how you did it. We've covered the evolution, the components and the implementation of the system. Obviously, an immense amount of effort has gone into it. But is it working? To find out, we spoke to a few managers about the effects or results of the new system.
Initially, I was quite opposed to this system. But later on, I found that the younger lot of managers, they were quite enthusiastic about it all. I kept an open mind, gave it a fair trial. And now, I have really come to depend on it.
Essentially, this system has helped me to assign jobs to the people with the right skills and aptitudes. In fact, I have started to evaluate my boys along the criteria given in the appraisal forms and of course utilizing their strengths to the fullest extent.
Most of us are appraiser as well as appraisee. If we utilize this system properly, we can get the best from our juniors. We can also develop them in the best way. Actually, similar thing we can expect from our seniors, and we can get the best from our seniors to judge us, and in the long run the plant will be best benefited.
The system is time consuming, but the purpose is objectivity. From the earlier system where it was more of a general impression, this to date is objectivity. I've started believing in the system.
Well, I think it's great that rewards and promotions are now based on performance. In case they are based on seniority, you don't even feel like putting in any effort or to use your mind. You just wait for the years to pass on. In this system, I know that I can compete with my peers and try to move up faster.
The one important gain is that the whole appraisal process is over in a scheduled time because the whole system is a term bound.
There are certainly some problems, but it is more in its implementation. It is from the people using the system. I'm sure we will all learn to make it even better.
And now a final word from the chairman, Mr. Krishnamurthy.
I think our greatest achievement has been to inculcate the performance culture in SAIL. Complacence has been replaced with confidence. Stagnation has given way to striving. The results have in fact been way above our expectations. Our financial and production figures are one aspect. The other is pride. Our managers today command greater respect in the community. We are able to attract better and better talents because word has spread that SAIL rewards merit and merit alone. It has been a long haul. We still have a lot left to be done, but a beginning has been made. Now it is up to us to move ahead.
And on that note of hope and confidence, we conclude. I hope you learnt as much about appraisal as I did. If not, you can always join SAIL. Thank you and goodbye.